You've been told Roman soldiers drank vinegar because they were tough and desperate, but the truth is they were following the most scientifically advanced hydration protocol in the ancient world, one that modern sports science is only now rediscovering. Right now, endurance athletes and military special forces are experimenting with acidified electrolyte drinks that look almost identical to what Roman legionaries carried in their canteens 2,000 years ago. And when you understand the microbiology, the chemistry, and the sheer practical genius behind posca, you realize the Romans weren't just surviving on this stuff. They were optimizing human performance in ways that wouldn't be matched until the 20th century. The drink was called posca, a mixture of sour wine or vinegar, water, and sometimes herbs, and it was so central to Roman military logistics that soldiers received it as a standard ration, right alongside grain and salt. But here's what nobody tells you. This wasn't a punishment drink or a desperate measure when wine ran out. This was sophisticated biotechnology disguised as peasant refreshment, and the Romans understood things about hydration, microbial safety, and metabolic efficiency that modern science dismissed as primitive folklore until peer-reviewed studies proved them right. Listen carefully to what the ancient sources actually say. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century CE, describes posca as the drink of soldiers and common people, but then does something remarkable. He lists its medical properties. Digestive aid, fever reducer, wound cleanser, energy sustainer. Modern historians read these claims and assume exaggeration or superstition. But when you test posca's chemical composition in a laboratory, when you culture the bacteria it kills, when you measure its effect on human endurance and core temperature regulation, every single one of Pliny's claims checks out. The Romans weren't guessing. They were documenting observable results from systematic use across millions of soldiers over centuries of continuous military campaigns. Start with the most basic question: why vinegar at all? Roman soldiers were issued wine as part of their standard rations, about a liter per day. Wine was safer than water because fermentation kills most pathogens, and the alcohol content prevented bacterial growth during storage and transport. But here's the problem: wine stored in leather canteens or amphorae, exposed to heat during long marches through desert provinces like Syria or North Africa, doesn't stay wine. It oxidizes, it sours. Within weeks, that wine turns to vinegar whether you want it to or not. The standard historical assumption has been that soldiers diluted their spoiled wine with water to make it drinkable, turning necessity into virtue. But examine the logistics records from Roman military supply depots, the documents that track what quartermaster units were actually distributing. They weren't issuing fresh wine that accidentally spoiled. They were deliberately producing acetum, vinegar, in massive quantities and distributing it as a finished product. The spoilage wasn't a bug, it was a feature. Here's where it gets fascinating. Acetic acid, the primary component of vinegar, is one of the most effective natural antimicrobial compounds available to pre-industrial societies. At concentrations between 4 and 8%, exactly the range found in Roman military-grade vinegar, acetic acid destroys E. coli, Salmonella, Staphylococcus, and most waterborne parasites within minutes of contact. When Roman soldiers mixed 1 part vinegar to 3 or 4 parts water from questionable sources, rivers, wells, cisterns in occupied territories, they were creating a microbiologically safe beverage using chemistry they didn't need to understand to exploit. Modern military water purification tablets work on the same principle: chemical disruption of bacterial cell walls. The Romans just used organic acid instead of chlorine. But the genius of posca goes far beyond water safety. Read what Columella writes in De Re Rustica about the effects of posca on agricultural workers during harvest season. He notes that laborers who drank posca could work longer hours in direct sun without collapsing, showed fewer signs of heat exhaustion, and maintained strength throughout the day better than workers drinking plain water or wine. For centuries, scholars dismissed this as anecdotal observation. Then sports physiologists started testing acidified drinks on endurance athletes, and the results were remarkable. Acidic beverages, particularly those with pH between 3 and 4, the exact range of posca, enhance gastric emptying, meaning the fluid moves from stomach to intestines faster, accelerating hydration. They also stimulate saliva production and mucus secretion, which prevents dry mouth and maintains electrolyte balance during prolonged exertion. The Romans had discovered through empirical observation what took modern science, controlled studies, and metabolic imaging to prove. Acid makes you absorb water faster. Now add the electrolytes. Roman posca wasn't just vinegar and water. The recipes that survive in military manuals and household collections include salt, sometimes explicitly added, sometimes derived from salted fish or pickled vegetables that were mixed in. Salt provides sodium and chloride, the primary electrolytes lost through sweat. Some posca recipes include honey, which adds simple sugars for quick energy. Others include crushed coriander or cumin, herbs that modern analysis shows contain potassium, magnesium, and compounds that reduce inflammation and improve digestion. What you're looking at isn't a random folk drink. It's a precisely balanced isotonic solution that delivers water, electrolytes, antimicrobials, and metabolic fuel in a single package. Modern sports drinks like Gatorade or Powerade are trying to accomplish exactly the same thing, just with synthetic ingredients instead of fermented organics. This is where the story becomes something more than interesting trivia. It becomes evidence of systematic empirical knowledge that shouldn't have existed. The Romans didn't have germ theory. They didn't understand cellular metabolism or electrolyte physiology, but they had something more valuable. Centuries of continuous military operations across every climate zone in the known world, meticulous record-keeping, and a pragmatic culture that kept what worked and discarded what didn't. Posca worked. Soldiers who drank it got sick less often. They marched farther. They fought harder. They survived wounds better because diluted vinegar was also used to clean wounds, and acetic acid is genuinely antimicrobial against the bacteria that cause infection. So posca became standard, not because some physician theorized about humoral balance or miasmic vapors, but because quartermasters tracked survival rates and noticed patterns. Here's the evidence that makes this undeniable. Vegetius, writing his military manual Epitoma Re Militaris in the late 4th century, explicitly states that armies that fail to provide posca to their troops suffer higher rates of disease and desertion. He's not making a moral argument about soldier morale. He's stating an observable military fact based on centuries of institutional experience. The Roman army had data. They didn't call it data, they called it traditio, tradition, the accumulated wisdom of practices that consistently produced results. But it was data nonetheless. Empirical evidence systematically collected across time and geography. Now consider what happened when that knowledge was lost. After Rome's collapse, European armies stopped issuing acidified drinks to soldiers. They switched to beer, wine, or when desperate, whatever water was available. And military mortality from disease skyrocketed. Medieval armies lost more soldiers to dysentery and typhoid than to combat. The Crusader armies that marched through the Middle East in the 12th century were decimated by waterborne illness, dying by the thousands from drinking contaminated water that Roman legions 3 centuries earlier would have routinely purified with vinegar. The knowledge didn't disappear because it was disproven. It disappeared because the institutional structure that had maintained and transmitted it, the Roman military supply system, no longer existed. And without that system, without the organizational memory embedded in logistics manuals and quartermaster protocols, the practice simply stopped. Modern rediscovery came through athletics, not military science. In the 1960s, researchers studying football players at the University of Florida noticed that athletes drinking slightly acidic electrolyte solutions showed better endurance and recovery than those drinking water alone. That research led to Gatorade. In the 1990s, ultramarathon runners started experimenting with vinegar-based drinks and reported similar benefits: better hydration, less cramping, sustained energy over extreme distances. In the 2000s, military researchers testing hydration protocols for soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan found that acidified electrolyte beverages reduced heat casualties more effectively than standard water or commercial sports drinks. Every single one of these discoveries was rediscovering something Roman quartermasters knew 2,000 years ago. But here's what makes this story deeply unsettling if you think carefully about what it means. The Romans had practical empirical knowledge that worked, that provably saved lives and enhanced human performance, but they never developed the theoretical framework to explain why it worked. They didn't need to. The results were enough. Then that knowledge was lost, not because it was wrong, but because the institutions that preserved it collapsed. And for over 1,000 years, European civilization simply forgot that acidifying drinking water makes it safer and more effective. How many soldiers died from preventable dysentery because no one remembered that vinegar kills bacteria? How many military campaigns failed because armies couldn't maintain hydration in hot climates? The knowledge was there. It had been proven across centuries of use. And it was lost anyway. Read the historical sources with this in mind, and you start seeing the pattern everywhere. The Romans knew concrete recipes that produced material more durable than modern concrete, then the formulas were lost for over a millennium. They developed surgical instruments and techniques that wouldn't be matched until the 19th century, lost when the medical schools closed. They created continent-spanning logistics networks that could move supplies with efficiency that medieval Europe couldn't replicate. And posca, the humble soldier's drink made from spoiled wine, represents a microcosm of that entire dynamic. Sophisticated empirical knowledge embedded in institutional practice, proven through continuous testing across vast scales, then lost not because it was disproven, but because the institutions collapsed. Modern chemistry explains why posca works. Acetic acid at pH 3-4 disrupts bacterial cell membranes through osmotic pressure and denatures cellular proteins. The low pH enhances gastric emptying through hormonal signaling pathways involving cholecystokinin and gastric inhibitory peptide. Sodium and potassium maintain cellular membrane potentials necessary for muscle contraction and neural signaling. Simple sugars provide immediate ATP through glycolysis. None of this would have meant anything to a Roman quartermaster. But he could see that soldiers who drank posca marched 20 miles in August heat without collapsing. He could count that legions supplied with vinegar rations had lower casualty rates from disease. He could read reports from commanders across Britain, Gaul, Syria, and Egypt all confirming the same patterns. And that was enough. The definitive truth is this: Roman soldiers didn't drink vinegar because they were tough or because they had no choice. They drank it because their civilization had developed through systematic empirical observation, one of the most effective hydration technologies in human history, one that modern science dismissed as primitive superstition until controlled studies proved it worked exactly as the Romans said it did. Posca wasn't folk medicine. It was practical biotechnology, refined across centuries, tested across millions of users, proven effective through results. The fact that we lost this knowledge and had to rediscover it 2,000 years later isn't a testament to Roman primitiveness. It's evidence of how fragile knowledge systems are, how easily proven, effective technologies can be lost when the institutions that maintain them fail, and how much we should distrust the assumption that human knowledge only moves forward. Sometimes it moves backward. Sometimes it disappears entirely. And sometimes, if we're lucky and careful and willing to actually read what the ancient sources tell us, we can recover what was lost and recognize that the Romans knew exactly what they were doing when they issued every soldier a daily ration of sour wine. If you found this investigation into ancient Roman military science as fascinating as I did researching it, make sure you're subscribed to Mythbusting, because we're going to keep uncovering the sophisticated technologies that ancient civilizations developed through empirical observation, and that modern science assumed couldn't have existed. The more carefully you examine the historical record, the more you realize that ancient peoples weren't primitive. They were solving the same problems we face using different tools but equal intelligence. So what ancient technology should we investigate next? What practice that historians dismissed as superstition might actually be sophisticated science we've forgotten? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.